only thing of real importance that leaders do is to create and manage culture. Biggest things in business that separate the kind of the wheat from the chaff, if you like, in my experience. The world is moving faster, it's more complex, you've got to worry about sustainability, you've got about diversity and inclusion, you've got to work about, supply chains. And what I see in a lot of mainstream businesses that do not have great cultures is they talk customer service, they talk innovation, they talk whatever it is. Yet everybody knows what gets measured, recognized, and rewarded is budget cuts and sales performance. What great businesses do is they structure it. They don't leave it to chance. The biggest thing is, we're in a war for talent, right? What does it cost us to have tens of thousands of people working for lots of companies who fundamentally are disenfranchised with their organizations?
Have you ever wondered what the real secrets are of some of the most admired and successful businesses? Think Google, think Airbnb, think Tesla, think Lego. Well, in this Lead to Succeed episode, our guest Adrian Simpson, who has got to know these companies extremely well, shares and reveals secrets about them, what it is that gives them growth, what it is that they do around culture and leadership. So if you are interested in learning how you can apply some of these learnings to your own business, then listen to this podcast, because you're going to be intrigued by what he reveals, the secrets he shares, and how it can be useful and impactful in your own business. So very big welcome to you, Adrian. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you.
Awesome. Well, it's really a pleasure to have you on the podcast today, Adrian. Thanks so much for taking the time out to chat with us. I think, from your experience in some of the companies that you work with, we're going to have a really fascinating conversation. I was just kind of going through the program that Wavelength have for your customers in the USA. We're really interested to hear, what do you think, what are some of the main similarities you see in those leadership teams across some of those really famous companies?
That's a great question, Caleb. I spend a lot of time reflecting on, because as you've alluded to, I've spent 30 years going inside the boardrooms, shop floors of great companies, not just in North America, but also in China, in India, across Europe, and reflecting on what are some of those characteristics. I would say one of the characteristics of great organizations is they have a really, really clear, compelling sense of purpose, and they don't just talk it, they actually walk it. And so, and I'm talking about something which, a sense of purpose which appeals to the intrinsic motivation of the employees, something that really ideally gets people out of bed in the morning. It goes beyond shareholder value, beyond, kind of customer, all the kind of cliches you get on the classic sort of mission statements in the corporate world. And, when you see a really powerful purpose in action, you see the ability to galvanize people's energy and spirit. It's something quite remarkable to see. And I would say, so whether it's in India, there is an incredible organization called the Aravind Eye Care System, which is the largest specialist provider of eye care in the world. They've reached about 70 million people over the last 50 years. And they've had the same guiding purpose for 50 years, which is to eradicate needless blindness. I don't know about you, but I'd get out of bed in the morning for that as my purpose. Or if you, in a more UK-based example, Babylon Health, which floated last year, talked about to put accessible, affordable healthcare in the hands of every person on earth. And, you get purposes like that, and they transcend just those cliches that you normally hear. Like really, so I think that's one trait is that. I think, another one, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, in more detail, which is an incredible, uncompromising focus on culture and fit and culture fit. The best organizations and the best leaders in the world do not relent on the quality of the people that they will bring into their organization. They make it almost the most important decision that a leader will ever make is the caliber of the individuals that they are bringing into that organization. And that is something I have seen time and time again. And whether it's Southwest Airlines 50 years later and the relentless, obsessive focus they put on recruitment, and I can tell some stories about how they do that, or whether it was, I had the pleasure, so Wavelength's core business is kind of bringing the outside world in. So trying to provide our clients with that external inspiration, education, indeed provocation. And we ran a fantastic session last year with Joe Zadar, who was employee number 9 at Airbnb, who went on to the main executive board And he told the story when he was interviewed for Airbnb as employee number 9 by Brian Chesky, the other two founders. He had 14 interviews.
How many?
14
Wow.
as employee number 9.
Wow.
And they weren't testing for his engineering skills. They knew he was a brilliant engineer. What they wanted to figure out was, this guy was literally going to be working in the apartment which they founded the business from. Was he someone that was going to fit their culture, right? And that's, and I've heard stories of that number of interviews today in even businesses like Apple or what have you. And it's not just the quantity, it's the variety. It's really trying to understand, who are you? What's your moral fiber? What's your character? What are your values? And that's what great organizations and great leaders look for.
Yeah, it's so interesting, I think, because you kind of alluded to, obviously culture there and having that like vision transcend throughout the whole team or the whole organization, which I think is two things that we often hear a lot, but actually making sure that does actually happen. And it's not just a cliche, like, putting the customer first or something like that. And I'd be really curious, how do you think, like, what separates the companies that actually really do that well and that vision, like, does, I don't really like the phrase, but like does trickle down to every person in the company? For lack of a better way of phrasing it, as opposed to those other companies where it's just something that's perhaps posted on the wall. How do you think companies actually do that, Adrian, or do it effectively?
I think it comes down to, I'm actually going to say it's structured. It becomes a non-negotiable part of their culture. It becomes the way of doing things around here, right? And it's so, you take with Southwest Airlines. I had this fantastic interview. We hosted a session earlier this year with the 3 of their top leadership team. Elizabeth Bryant, who's their sort of vice president of people, talked about, how they will go about recruiting for attitude versus skill. And so she had the process basically, it goes along lines like this. If they invite you to Dallas Love Field to interview with Southwest Airlines, they will, by a matter of course, check back with every single person you've interacted with is part of the kind of the value chain of getting to Southwest Airlines. They'll talk to the flight attendant on the plane that flew you to Love Field. They will talk to the shuttle bus driver who drove you from the hotel to the head office. They'll talk to the doorman who opens the door for you. They'll talk to the receptionist, which interestingly they call the director of first impressions, because that's exactly what they are, right? And she said, one of my team will meet you in the lobby and walk you to my office if you get that far. Because if at any point in that value chain, we discover you've been rude, we terminate the interview. Because we're trying to figure out, are you the kind of person that's going to try and charm me in the meeting room, which a lot of people can do, but is rude to the waiter. Yeah. And so the kind of structure they've got in place is they kind of interview you before you're being interviewed. And so, when that becomes the way you do things around here, or you'll see, they'll ask, so in the same spirit, they will ask behavior-based interview questions. So Airbnb is one of, in my experience, most employee-centric and customer-centric organizations I've ever come across. And I don't think they quite get the press they deserve for it. But I know that they put the host at the center of their business, right? And so when they're interviewing, what they're trying to figure out is, do you view others first? And so one of the questions they might ask you is, when was the last time you showed compassion for somebody? As part of your interview question, which is a brilliant question. So I think it's those kind of things. So one of the biggest things in business that separates the kind of the wheat from the chaff, if you like, in my experience, is I call it alignment, right? Relentless alignment, which is, there is a truth in business and in life, which what gets measured, recognized, and rewarded gets done and gets celebrated. And what I see in a lot of mainstream businesses that do not have great cultures is they talk customer service, they talk innovation, they talk whatever it is. Yet everybody knows what gets measured, recognized, and rewarded is budget cuts and sales performance, right? So when you dig under the surface, there's a disconnect. And I think you need to be you need to really mind the gap in business between what you say it is that you value and what actually people know you value. And they know it by what gets measured, what gets recognized, or what gets rewarded. And to your point, what great businesses do is they structure it. They don't leave it to chance. So I'll give you another example. So in the UK, Timpson, the retailer, one of the most successful retailers in Britain, shoe repairs, key cutting, not a particularly glamorous business, but a very successful business, dry cleaning, those kind of services. Many times when they entered the Great Place to Work awards, they won them. They have a belief in their culture that you can only lead your people if you know your people. And the way that manifests itself is that if you are a regional manager at Timpson and you've got, 30 or 40 staff reporting into you, and you turn up to a kind of offsite, James Timpson, the CEO, or John, his father, the chairman, or one of the top leadership team, will put a piece of paper in front of you. And it's on that piece of paper, Callum, is a name of one of those 30 or 40 people that work for you. And then there's 10 or 12 questions. What's their partner's name? Where do they last go on holiday? If they had £20 for a birthday present, what would you buy them? Do they have a pet? What's it called? Right? Literally a dozen or so personal questions. And you are expected to get 80% of those right. Okay? And if you don't have 80% right, they'll have a serious conversation with why you don't know your people. Right? And so they're structuring it. They're saying, this is what's really important to us in our culture, in our value, in our business, is that, this is a team sport. To really know your people, and to know your people, we're going to test you. Right? So it's those structures that really drive those behaviors, I think, that sets out the average performing companies from the great companies.
That's a phenomenal example. I really think that's so impressive. What other examples have you seen, Adrian? Because I think we're coming to a point now where we're all beginning to recognize that getting good talent is going to be challenging. Yeah. So what other examples have you seen where companies really live and breathe what they say around it's people first? It's people that are going to make the difference to our success.
Gosh, I would say, well, we mentioned them earlier. I would say, the Ritz-Carlton is another phenomenal example. And I think one of the things that Ritz-Carlton do brilliantly is you strip away the glamorous brand. Okay, so Ritz-Carlton are a super premium luxury hotel brand. When you actually strip it away, they have tens of thousands of people who basically every day are cleaning tables, parking cars, and cleaning hotel rooms. That's not glamorous work, right? But what they do an extraordinary job of is giving those frontline employees, who they call ladies and gentlemen. And they have this lovely credo saying, we are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen, right? Now, if you just start at that position, right? You're ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen, right? You are, you just automatically, people feel elevated, right? And they're saying, this is not a subservient transaction. And despite the fact that this guest may be spending on a hotel room a night what you earn in month or 2 months or 3 months, depending on the price of these, you can pay £5,000 a night or more in some of their premier properties for a room, right? And you've got a Hispanic maid who's earning probably £25,000 a year. That could be a massive disconnect and could be subservient. So first of all, that whole thing about we're ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen, I think elevates the people to feel, that they're on an equal platform. And then they just, one of the things that they do is they communicate unbelievably well. So in every single Ritz-Carlton hotel, and Four Seasons do exactly the same thing. They call it something else. They hold a lineup, and it's a 15-minute cascade of information to every single Ritz-Carlton hotel employee in the world, whether you're in their head office, whether you are in a hotel on the front line. It lasts 15 minutes, and it's a cascade of information. Everything from what's happening in this hotel today. So, Ford Motor Company are here. So if you see somebody walking down the corridor with a Ford badge on, they're in the King's Suite. To Rebecca's staying here today, it's her wedding anniversary, and so make sure that you acknowledge you have to have it right. But the genius is, like, it's every third day they tell a wow story of service excellence delivered by a lady and gentleman somewhere around the world, right? And they tell that story. So you think about it. So you're a new hire employee, you're a new lady and gentleman at Ritz-Carlton. At the end of your first year, you've heard 150 stories of excellence in service delivered by a peer around the world, right? And not only does it help you understand in the moment, inspire possibility in your mind about what great service might look like, because you've heard 150 stories. What a fantastic thing as an employee to have your story of how you delighted a customer told globally to the entire workforce. And they even do a book every year in which those stories are celebrated and recorded forever.
I mean, that again, that's phenomenal. Huge amount of focus going into that. Can you see a direct? I mean, they are the amazing companies. Do you see a direct correlation between that sort of effort into putting the team at the center of the business to the financial performance, or the reduction in staff turnover?
Oh, unequivocally. I mean, there has been studies done. I haven't got the one to hand that have actually tracked the performance of companies that have appeared in things like the Great Place to Work Institute awards and their stock performance over a long time. And there's been a incredible thing. But I think the biggest thing is, we're in a war for talent, right? We all know the cost of recruiting people, right, is immense, not only in terms of time, but also, in money, if you're paying recruitment fees. And if you're running if you can't retain that staff because basically they turn up and they experience in some instances are toxic cultures, right? And your rates of turnover are, in some retail environments, it's 70 and 80%. It's just, or even, it's crazy, right? You can get that down to, sort of 10% or so, but the amount of time and money you'll save. But of course, all that knowledge and expertise that is also being retained with those individuals, right? And if you can't retain that, the chance of them being able to delight and serve your customers long term is also diminished. And so I think there is just an unequivocal benefit. And I think it even goes beyond the immediate financial performance of the organizations. What I see is this, which is I see the ripple effect of Great Place to Work cultures. And I see the ripple effect of the opposite, which is, if you basically work for a company where you feel like you are truly valued and respected, when you get dignity and respect, you have great opportunities, you are just a more positive human being, right? And you are then a happier, healthier person around everyone you interact with, your friends, your family, and wider society. And the opposite is true, right? And so I think that, the cost is not just on the financial performance of the organization. It's the cost of what does it cost us to have tens of thousands of people working for lots of companies who fundamentally are disenfranchised with their organizations in terms of their mental health and the extra societal impact.
Such a good point, Adrian. And I think the sad fact is that so many people are disenfranchised with the companies where they work. So it's such a good point to make.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of don't really know where to start. I agree with so many things you just said there. So I think that point you made just then, like, I can definitely relate to that as well. Feeling valued within the company and having opportunities coming your way. But I also really like that story you said. I think it was Rich Thompson where you said, please wasn't it, where the airline attendant, evaluates you, the bus driver, just person on the door, the receptionist, and so on. I really like that phrase. That was it, director of first impressions, I think.
Yeah, director of first impressions. Well, that's interesting. I mean, language of business is such a powerful thing. What is a receptionist? They are a director of first impressions, right? It's exactly what they are, right? You will form an opinion of a company, quite often, or a hotel, wherever it is, within the first 30, 60 seconds walking through the door.
Yeah.
Right. And, now that vibe is. And, I think what we're talking about here is, for me is, what is the role of a leader, right? And I think my favorite quotes is Ed Schein, who's the professor at MIT. And he says, the only thing of real importance that leaders do is to create and manage culture. At the end of the day, it's the only thing of real importance that you do. And I think, the very, very best leaders that I've seen around the world, truly recognize and truly understand that. That's the only thing of real importance they do. And then that really governs how they view the world, and it governs their own behavior, right? And, I've mentioned Southwest Airlines, we've mentioned earlier on, but, the late, great Herb Kelleher, once said, power should be reserved for weightlifting and boats. And, which I just think is just, yet that's not how it's reviewed in most organizations. A lot of leaders think power is leadership, right? And it's not. It's about followership, right? If you actually recognize that the only thing of real importance that you do is to manage and create culture, how then as a leader do you spend your time? What are you doing? Whether it is, whatever, what I'm just thinking about, one of my, again, favorite sort of quotes in the same theme, and it goes to setting and managing culture. Terry Kelly, who was the former chief exec of W.L. Gore Associates, the company behind Gore-Tex, talks about, the importance of being on message as a leader. And she has this great quote. She says, if you have director in your job title, you have forfeited the right to complain in public. And I absolutely love that, because their point isn't that you can't disagree or you can't have a healthy debate or a dialogue with your colleagues, your co-workers. Of course you can, but you have that in a closed door environment. And the importance is that when you leave that meeting or message, you are on message. Because if you're the kind of leader that sits in those meetings, whether they're physical or virtual, nodding in agreement, or, and then leaves and walks down the corridor, physically or virtually, and immediately undermines everything that's been said and everyone who is in the room, well, what kind of culture are you creating, right? And so I think for me, it goes back to that, realization that as leaders, that's the only thing of real importance that you do. And it goes to why, for example, putting such an emphasis on recruitment is so important, because if only thing you're doing is setting and defining the culture, you better be damn sure that you're bringing people into the culture that have the right attitude, that aren't going to be toxic, that are going to be, in it for the right reasons, the right motivation, rather than those that are just going to be, wow you in an interview, just want to be all about them, and have the ripple effect can be horrific on the culture of an organization and making a wrong hire.
I think that's I really like what you just said there, Adrian. And if we say, I'm sure on our podcast, we've got some, say, leaders in smaller businesses and small teams within, say, like slightly smaller companies. And I think those stories of like Ritz-Carlton, Tesla, Apple, Southwest Airlines, very aspirational. Obviously, they're sort of like quite large companies, they're quite well established. They've been around for a long time. So let's say you're leading like a small team, or you're the head of a smaller business. What would you think would be the top 3 ways that someone could start to, ensure that they have like a really amazing culture they kind of implement and threat the business, and everyone sort of buys into the vision?
I think first of all, good news, you're a small business. You can get your head around it. And good news, you can pull levers and things happen. In a lot of big businesses, neither of those two things are true. So actually celebrate and recognize the fact that actually you're all much more in control in a small business than you are in a big business. I think, first of all, perhaps define what your culture is, truly define it, right? Because until you know what it is, I don't know if you can recruit against it, in what you are. And I think there's a lot of, BS when it comes to things like values, right? Really define what are the core values of this organization, right? And I'd step away from the cliched customer first, integrity, employees are mostly, yawn, right? I mean, I'm talking about, LinkedIn, had a value for a while. I'm not sure they still do, which was because they did a survey amongst their top 100 leaders about what's the most valuable trait that the top 100 leaders saw in the leaders they rated the most. And the number one result was get shit done, GSD, right? Which I think was great. Have a value called get shit done, right? Blizzard Entertainment, it was just being bought out by, they had, embrace your inner geek. They're a gaming business. They wanted people to geek out, so I think in a really authentic way, define what that culture is, right? Because when you define the culture, I think then you can say, okay, well, what are the kind of attitudinal tributes that people that fit our culture? And once you define the attitudes or tributes, then you're starting to base behavior-based questions around those attitudes when you're recruiting. And then the next thing is the alignment piece, is to say, okay, how do we really make sure that we're aligning, that we're saying these are the behaviors we want? How do we make sure we're recognizing, rewarding those? And that I mentioned earlier about purpose. I think, if you can have a clear, concise and compelling purpose that really appeals to the intrinsic motivation of people, particularly in this sort of war for talent environment, you're already off to a head start.
Do you think, Adrian, that purpose should be a collective purpose? Do you think it should be the leader defines it, or do you think the team with the leader should define it?
I think it's probably a combination of the two. I think it has to be, I think it can be defined by either. I've seen it done from top down, I've seen it done from bottom up. I think the most important thing is it's shared, it's communicated, and it's lived. That's the most important thing, whether it's top down or bottom up. So, for example, I mentioned earlier, best of the best of the best of the world by a country mile is the RFID eye care system, to eradicate needless blindness. It's crystal clear. It's clear, concise and compelling as you get. But it could just be a set of words. What I see at Aravind is when you go to India and this is an organization that treats 4 or 5 million patients a year. And we were walking around, we took a wavelength group to India to go and visit one of the Aravind Eye Care System. We were walking around one of their hospitals. So I'm just going to say that again. It was a bit stumbled over my words. So we went to India to visit the Aravind Eye Care System. And when we were walking around one of the hospitals in Chennai, there on the walls by department, you would see the articulation of that department's role in the eradication of needless blindness. So you would literally see, we are housekeeping. Our role in the eradication of needless blindness is to ensure the healthy, sterile working environment for our patients and our colleagues. Medical Records Department. Our role in the eradication of needless blindness is to ensure the accurate a timely recording of all information for our, and it literally where you went. And so, now that purpose was defined by the founder, Dr. V, who, passed away 15, 20 years ago now, right? When he started the organization in 1971, he started it with the purpose to eradicate needless blindness. It's kept that purpose for 50 years, but the point is it's lived and it's breathed. And in every single conversation we've had with that executive leadership at Aravind Eye Care System, it is literally, if this action is going to help eradicate needless blindness, proceed. If it doesn't, don't. And so I don't think it's as much about whether it's top down or bottom up. It's about actually is whether it's breathed, whether it's communicated, and whether it's understood. And ultimately, it causes, does it cause perhaps pain to the organization, right? Because, you can have a purpose or you like, but that only really becomes tested when a decision has to be made that may cost you money or time or resources that's in service of that purpose.
Yeah, interesting, Adrian, because it could also mean you have to make some tough decisions or painful decisions.
Absolutely.
And that's when it becomes very difficult, I think. But
Absolutely. I was on a call with a very senior former leader at Airbnb literally a week ago, and she ran she was actually a corporate lawyer there, but she helped massively with their strategy and their thinking. And she talked about how ultimately they are in the hospitality business and they put the host at the heart of the business. And she told stories about a number of moments in Airbnb's history where they had to make or break decisions, literally make or break decisions. One of those examples was that when there was a whole thing about hosts not paying taxes, right? And the hosts were getting a lot of pressure on it. The hosts were feeling pressurized. The cities were getting up in arms saying, well, we're not getting any money from these people being hosted. The hotels were up in arms saying, why are we collecting taxes? And it was just this circle. And she said, legally, we weren't allowed to take taxes. We're not set up. We were a platform. We couldn't collect taxes. But ultimately, because they're the hospitality business and they put the host at the center of the organization, and they wanted Airbnb to be a good corporate citizen, good thing for the world, and not cause friction with the cities, how they made a decision that they had to start helping their hosts to collect taxes, which was never in their core purpose, never in the mission. It cost them hundreds of millions of dollars to implement, but they collected hundreds of millions of billions of dollars of taxes. But it was the right thing to do because it basically, and that's where it was. It was a long-term decision to say this is a painful decision. It's not even our core purpose. But if we are true about being a good corporate citizen, about doing the right things for cities, the right thing for hosts, we have to do this. We have to take this on.
do you think, Adrian, the world of leadership is changing? Do you think we're seeing a shift in leadership?
Oh my God, it is unequivocally the most complex and difficult time to be a leader.
What do you think that way? Sorry, you're probably about to say, Adrian, but let's just start curious.
Well, if you think about it, and you go back, I think in the sort of good old days, you had to just perhaps worry about motivating your people and delivering financial results for your shareholders. As the last few years have proven, the geopolitical environment in which you're operating can change things in a heartbeat. Threats to supply chains that suddenly destabilize your entire business because, there's been somebody's invaded somebody, or COVID completely takes out your supply chains. You think about the pressures on sustainability, right? Never before have businesses been under so much pressure around sustainability agendas, so they have to be paying attention. You think about the focus on diversity and inclusion. So as a leader now, you have to be paying attention to, whether your business, is it sustainable? Where are we at with our diversity and inclusion agenda? How aware are we to external how vulnerable are we to geopolitical effects that could take our business out? You turbocharge onto that the impact of technology on businesses, which is, business models being destroyed in record time. The length of tenure of businesses on the FTSE 100, FTSE 250, Fortune 500 has never been shorter. So the world is moving faster. It's more complex. You've got to worry about sustainability. You've got about diversity and inclusion. You've got to work about, supply chains. You've got so much more to worry about. And so, one of my pleas to leaders is, I think in response to that, you absolutely have to have your stealing, once again, a radar, Ritz-Carlton philosophy, which is radar on and antennae up. You need to be, as a leader, far more aware of what's happening in the outside world, how your customers are viewing you, what impact your control might have on your key stakeholders than you ever have before. And you need to pay much more time to getting that external inspiration, education, stimulus all the time. Because if you are operating right now in the same echo chamber in your organization, talking to the same people about the same things internally, day in, day out, it is just not good enough in the environment, the complex, difficult, some call it VUCA environment in which we operate today.
I think that's such good advice, because I think you can apply that exactly regardless of how big your business is, whether you're in a small team or a massive huge organization or family business. You can go out there and do things that you just said. So that's really actual advice, I think, for all our listeners on this.
Adrian, you go.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I've spent my entire life, Callum, encouraging people to swipe with glee. Right? Swipe with glee, ideas and stimulus. This is why your podcast is brilliant, right? You're capturing the wisdom from people who've been there and done it. I've spent 30 years going in the boardroom, shop floors, and meeting with leaders who've been there and done it. None of this is often rocket science. It's and when it comes down to culture, particularly, it's really interesting. Somebody made a point many years ago, which they said was basically, we're all essentially in the same business. We're in the business of trying to figure out how to win and engage the human spirit, right? None of us, because people say, that's an airline, that's a hotel industry, and that's a retailer, that's a pharmaceutical company, that's an oil company. It wouldn't work in my sector. Well, the point they made was, none of us employ aliens. We all employ human beings, right? And fundamental human needs don't shift, right? They may shift a little bit around the world as you go around the world, but, fundamentally security and dignity, respect, and we like to have, be heard and have our voice and be appreciated and be encouraged. Those things basically don't change, right? And they never have. But you can learn a lot, steal a lot, swipe with glee, how do great leaders and great organizations around the world go about engaging and inspiring the human spirit. So, the great thing is by looking outside, by listening, by observing, by, talking, challenging, you can learn a lot.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I think that's incredible advice to share with our listeners. You better listen.
I'm not sure if I was or not. I've got so many other thoughts and ideas. Perhaps I will ask you, Adrian, what 3 pieces of advice would you give an SME business leader who wants to be recognised as a successful business, a progressive and growing business, having great leadership and culture? What 3 tips would you give them to help them to do that? And we've talked about setting the purpose and how you might do that. We've talked about communication. Are there any other 3 things that you would say do?
Yeah. So, I've talked about, so I've almost got 2 answers to the question. So there's some sort of organizational principles that I would get to, so clear, compelling purpose, absolutely in there, the right people on the bus, absolutely in there, obsessive focus on customer, put the customer absolutely the epicenter of your organization, unequivocally, I would echo that. We've talked about alignment, the power of it, making sure you're recognizing, rewarding, recognizing what you're doing. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Communicate up, communicate across, communicate down. A bit like the Ritz-Carlton story about the lineup. That's really important. So I think there are some organizational principles. I think also, though, I take it more as almost the individual level, and this is perhaps informed by great leaders I've seen in action, by my own beliefs. Number one thing I would say is build your networks. And it's not just networks, it's about really being strategic about where are you getting advice, support, and ideas from. In fact, there's a brilliant book called The Personal Boardroom, which I'm a massive advocate of, which gets you to really understand the difference between the power of networks and networking. And I'm not talking here about networking. I am allergic to the idea of turning up to some godforsaken event with a glass of wine and 200 people and walking around and wishing I could do something better with my life. I mean, I think it is just the most pointless, useless exercise. I'm talking about saying strategically, who are the people that would be useful to you in your business right now or your life right now to help you succeed? And I would advocate buying the book or reading the app, but they identify people that play very specific roles. So it's almost like their visual is you've got a boardroom table, it's got 10 seats around it. And each of those seats should be somebody who's playing a very specific role in your business or your career. Who's your chief connector? You want to learn from the outside. Who's got the best black book that you know that when you call them, they'll say, give me 48 hours, Rebecca, and I'll be back with you with an introduction, right? Who's your nerve giver? You're going to try to raise money from the bank or your shareholders. You're doing a presentation to the chairman and you're panicking. And it's the person you phone up and they say, you're gorgeous, you've got this, don't worry, right? Who's that person? Who's your coach? Who's your mentor? Who's your sponsor, right? Who's the voice of the customer? So really thinking about your networks. I mean, I have spent my entire life, I owe my entire business success to the power of my networks. So I'm a massive believer, and in my absolute belief and experience, so many leaders are far too insular and do not have powerful networks around them. So I would really advocate that. I mean, that feeds into kind of the whole, looking up, getting outside, structuring into your business life, reading, listening to podcasts, going to events, whatever it is, where you're getting that external view. And the third thing is get help. It's bloody lonely being a leader. It's bloody lonely and it's hard. And the best leaders that I've seen have those coaches, have those mentors, and have those sponsors. And I almost, define those things in three ways. And I've done this personally, which is, I sort of say a coach is a person who kind of, helps you figure out what you should be doing. A mentor basically tells you what you should be doing. And I think a sponsor kind of tells other people how great you are, right? So it's like, and you almost want those three people in your lives, right? So that's perhaps going a bit broader than your question, but hopefully useful.
It's a great response, Adrian. I think you've thrown a fresh perspective on networking, and I agree with you completely that what you don't like about networking, as opposed to having that powerful network of connectors and people that can really help you and support you. I think that's a great point. Thank you very much for that.
No problem. It's what I passionately believe in. As in any business, we've had some massive ups, we've had some massive downs. We lost 65% of our revenues in 2020 in COVID, because my business was based on running physical study tours where I took leaders to places like China and India and America, and that all went away in about 4 weeks. And it was people in my network, clients, friends who I could call upon, sometimes almost cry down the phone, who would pick me up, sometimes empathize, sometimes, say, come on, rally yourself. And it was literally one of those conversations where the spark of an idea came for a digital program called Way Then Inspire, which we set up 18 months ago, which now has 600 people subscribing to it, which has been the savior of our business in having 65% of revenues. And it would not have happened did I not have that network to call upon.
Yeah, no, I think you shared some incredible insights on this podcast, Adrian. Thanks very much for sharing that with us. I think from your stories of businesses that you work with, advice to other leaders for small businesses or large, and that sharing sort of share just excellent. Thank you very much for that. And as we draw things to a close, and as we mentioned just before we start hitting forward, we'd love to give our guests a little bit of time at the end of the podcast to share what's going on in their business, share what they're up to in their personal life, or how they can connect with them. So I'd love to just kind of hand back over to you, Adrian, and share any sort of closing thoughts or whatever you'd like to share with our audience.
No, thank you, Callum. I really appreciate the opportunity. I mean, I suppose again, two things. One is just I suppose just in part a bit of sort of a sort of reflection I've had on my leadership and great leaders I've seen, which I'd really encourage people to do, which is as a leader or as an individual, just really double down on where you get your energy from. And it's one of the most powerful questions a coach ever asked me. Because a lot of people talk about, I haven't got a purpose. I don't know what my purpose is. And they can struggle trying to find their purpose. Some people find it early. Some people never find it. But I think most of us can answer the question, where do you get your energy from? And it's a really good question to ask yourself. And when you do that, try and figure out a way to say, whether that's through your business, can you actually run a business that really serves that purpose, or outside of business, what is it? Is it spending time with friends, with family? Is it exercise? What is it? And really governing your life around that. And it's a very powerful question that a coach asked me many years ago, and has really helped me in my business and my career and to do that. And so I just wanted to kind of almost pass that on to people, because I think purpose is great, but it can sometimes be too aspirational. I'm never going to reach that. But just asking that simple question, when you're at your best, how are you feeling? Who are you with? What's around you? I think would be great. In terms of a wavelength perspective, as I mentioned earlier, our business is very simple. We are specialists at bringing the outside world in, providing our clients with that inspiration, that education, that provocation. If anyone would like to access that, our website is very simple, just wavelengthleadership.com. Please go on there. I mean, I do a lot of, couple of things. We give you an example, a couple of things we're doing. So literally in 2 weeks' time, I'm off to America with 20 top-level leaders from all around the world to go and spend 6 days going inside the boardroom shop floors of some of the companies we've mentioned in this podcast, Southwest Airlines, Ritz-Carlton, and then some of the great and good of Silicon Valley, the Googles, some of the leading VCs, thought leaders, and most disruptive companies in Silicon Valley. Doing that, we have a digital program called Inspire, which just brings in the outside world in every single month. And you can subscribe on your own, or you can subscribe a whole team to that. Or indeed, I do, quite a lot of public speaking. So if you ever wanted to, I'm always available to come and tell some stories at offsites or conferences. But that's but thank you for the opportunity today. It's been really great to have to reflect, actually, I guess, on some of the things that I've learned over the last 30 years of my career.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Adrian. From my side, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you.
And lovely to reconnect. Thank you, Adrian.
Absolute pleasure.